My name is Mikey. Thanks for joining this live recording of this podcast interview that will show up on our podcast feed in a few days. It is my honor to welcome our special guest. Mohamad Hafez is a Syrian-American artist and architect born in Damascus, raised in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and educated in the Midwestern United States, expressing the juxtaposition of East and West within him. Hafez's art reflects the political turmoil in the Middle East through the compilation of found objects, paint, and scrap metal. Using his architectural skills, Hafez creates surrealistic Middle Eastern streetscapes that are architectural in their appearance, yet politically charged in their content. His works reflects his deep interest in the cross-disciplinary exploration of street art and the realistic yet ironic sculptural work. His artwork has recently been featured in several highly acclaimed exhibitions and profiled in the National Public Radio, and the New York Times, the Guardian, and the New Yorker. He's a recipient of the 2018 Connecticut Arts Hero Award for his extensive and continuous body of work on such issues such as the Syrian civil war, the worldwide refugee crisis, and an overall desire to counter hate speech. Mohamad, thank you so much for joining us. You have been a person I've been wanting to speak to and have on the series for quite some time. So thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I guess the first question I want to ask you, Mohamad, is how are you? How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Alhamdulillah, we're living in a world where if you wake up safe and sound and you have food for the day and you have good health, you've owned this world. Alhamdulillah.
Yeah. Well, the reason why I ask is because I feel like the work that you do is, a lot of people's work is deeply personal and deeply emotional, but it feels like the work that you do is transportive and must feel like you don't really live in your body sometimes, and that you're not really in the room you're in. Is that how you feel a lot of times?
Yeah, that's quite accurate. I'm surprised you picked on that. Most people don't. But the process in itself is very much out of this world. And it's first and foremost a nostalgic trip for the artist himself.
Yeah.
I am, people think that I focus on the final product, and the process is it is what it is. In fact, the reality is I focus on the process.
Yeah.
And I focus on getting my mind and charging it with nostalgia. I'm looking at photos from Damascus and my childhood, and listening to music, burning some bakhur. I have a little water fountain here. So all of these stimulate your senses, and before you know it, if I am lucky, I click into this creative nostalgic zone, which the result of it are these things that I make. So oftentimes I relate to 50% of the detail that is put out there. The other 50% I have no recollection of.
Yeah, so you're an architect and you're a skilled architect. And architects are craftspeople. They learn a craft, they learn a trade, they understand how to build things. And I was listening to an interview that you gave where you were talking about this moment after 9/11, where you were Thanksgiving break, which is an experience I can relate to. I understood this experience very, very vividly when I heard you talk about it. After 9/11, stuck at school, everyone's back home. Everyone's gone home for Thanksgiving weekend, and you're stuck. Can you sort of give a little more context for the listeners who were maybe not alive post 9/11 or might not understand what that felt like? What was it like being being in the States as a Syrian student with freedom fries and Patriot Acts and travel bans and what was it like in that moment, and how do you think it affected not your artistic practice? How do you think it affected just the way you thought about what you should be doing with your life?
It was really a surreal experience. You have to bear in mind, I am number 3 of my 4 siblings, and the 2 older siblings have come to the United States 15 years before I have. So they have arrived in the United States since 1989. They went to Iowa State also and got a degree and continued life. So coming to the United States as a Syrian kid, I came in with a lot of familiarity in the sense that we used to come to the United States almost every summer to visit my brothers and sisters. So part of me was saying, you know, yeah, 9/11 had happened, but, you know, my family has been traveling to the United States back and forth, no problem. We have, you know, a good record. We have 2 kids working, 2 adults working and studying in the United States. What's the problem? And that's your subconscious. A lot of Arabs listening to you probably can relate to this, that we move, you know, freely and so on and so forth. What happened in 9/11 in the Bush administration, that they implemented a travel ban that was not called a travel ban. It was called NSEERS, National Security Entry-Exit Registration System. It affected 23 countries, 23 majorities, Muslim majority countries, and nationalities. And what that means, if you just held the passport of these countries, that meant SSSSS on your boarding pass, extra scrutiny, extra background check, extra delay on visas, extra delay, and you name it. So all of a sudden, my student visa took a year and a half to process. Then I got it finally, and then I came to the United States and it was stamped as single entry only. And I discovered this here in the United States, that it was single entry only. And I said, what does that mean? They said, well, you're more than welcome to stay in the United States and finish your studies, but every time you gotta go back home, you gotta reapply for a student visa all over again. And I said, I have to wait a year and a half, another year and a half to get approved. They said, well, we can't guarantee you anything right now. You are Muslim, Syrian, Mohammed, you know, things can take time. So a bunch of us, from many Arab nationalities at the time in 2003, learned very quickly that this is nothing to mess with. And in fact, we knew friends that went back and got stuck. They were denied to coming back. It was that really just blind xenophobia. It didn't take in consideration who you are, what are you doing, nothing. It's so all of a sudden I faced my reality that no, Muhammad, it doesn't matter that you came to the United States dozen times before, or you come from whatever. It does not matter. All the system sees is that you're Syrian Muslim named Muhammad, right? Lived in Saudi Arabia, raised in Saudi Arabia, born in Damascus. So that checks the boxes on 10 million things in the security systems, and the result was getting stuck here almost a decade, not being able to be with my family. And we're approaching Thanksgiving, and of course, as a new student coming to the United States, I had no idea what Thanksgiving was. I underestimated it. I didn't buy food for the house that day because I thought restaurants would be open. Well, I was surprisingly
not in Iowa.
Not in Iowa. Everything was shut down, and here I am starving in this place alone. And I was like, "Where's people? What's happening? You don't even shut down on Christmas like this. What is going on?" Well, it's Thanksgiving, buddy. So that was the context, really, that raised a lot of homesickness. And unfortunately, for a long time of my studying, holidays were a bitter
Oh, me too. Awful.
There were awful things to
Awful.
live through. And I relate, I sit down with a lot of international students now, and there's some of that still left, and I can relate to them. And I try to be that, older brother for them in the diaspora, and especially during the holiday times. But yeah, that was the crux of what had happened. And I just got stuck here 8 years, couldn't go home, and I became very, very homesick.
So, okay, I want to break down that word, home and sick, right? I feel like, because I can relate to this. I can relate to this idea of not necessarily thinking, oh my God, I want to go home. And crucially, it's these projects were not homes in Saudi. They were homes in Damascus that you're imagining, right? Was it primarily, I don't want to be here?
It's not that I don't want to be here. I know I grew up dreaming about getting an American education. It's like, I don't want to choose. Why would I choose? Why do you want to make me choose? You're framing it in a way that my Arab identity and Muslim identity is interfering with the peace of the world. Like they are in conflict with each other. Well, you either go there on the East Mohammed, or you either come here and study whatever you want.
Yeah.
There was that kind of unspoken mentality, especially during the Bush administration, and it's very unfortunate, very, 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 very unfortunate. And ghurba, the diaspora in itself, makes you nostalgic to a cup of coffee on the balcony, things that we treat as day-to-day things, and we disregard when we're living there. But when you are yanked out of your comfort zone and you are not allowed to go back to your these family circles, then you start longing for simple things. Hugging your mom in the morning, or kissing her, or having coffee with her on the balcony. Who has the right to take these away from another human being? Based on what? And what is the crime that all of the students and myself did? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. It was racial xenophobia in the 21st century. It was, in my mind, was no different than asking a Jew during the World War II to wear a star on their shoulder and to tell the world, I'm a Jewish person, treat me differently, during the World War II. And this is very similar. I was asked, and part of NCers, all of us were asked to check in with authorities and FBI every time we wanted to leave the state, every time we wanted to change phone numbers, addresses, every time we thought about going to any event out of state, that we have to check in and say, hi, I'm Mohammed, I'm going to this, can I go please?
Yeah. Do you think, just before we move on to that moment, so if you remember that sort of architectural library, you're sitting there all alone, and you start messing around and you start cobbling together these scenes. Do you think, had you been able to fly back, had you been able to hop on a plane, or go to some Syrian uncle's house in Illinois or whatever, some hypothetical proxy for home, do you think that instinct to rebuild and recreate and reimagine what these scenes could look like would have still been there?
Are you asking if I was able to fly there physically or metaphorically?
No, physically.
Physically, yeah. Well, I was blessed to have siblings in Chicago, close by, at our drive, so that helped a lot. And having some friends in Chicago helped a lot as well. But nonetheless, you're spending maybe a winter break there, and you're going back to school to be a full-time student. I think what had happened with me is that nostalgia, that homesickness, was a fire that I couldn't put out just by seeing in the diaspora.
Yeah.
There was so much that I fell in love in the built context of our region that you couldn't replicate. And for me was that detail, that overlapping layers of sounds and architecture and archaeology and music and smells and merchants and car horns and adhan and church bells and hammam pigeons flying all over you. That density of actions that are happening at a single place and time, that's what made it so special to me. And I couldn't replicate it in the West. In fact, a lot of people will relate to this. How many of your aunts and uncles that live outside, or my mom, for instance, take that. She's an American citizen that can live here and fine, but she doesn't. She prefers to live back home because it's that social life that they miss the most, that they cannot replicate anywhere else. And that's why we find a lot of our uncles and aunts in the West a little bit homesick most of the times. They're missing that.
Yeah. Do you think, so I want to talk a little bit about my first question about the transportation and sort of like the transportive nature of your work. So these three pieces that we have on the screen right now, I'll just read their names for those listening to the podcast: Frame Nostalgia 1, Damascene Adhan, and then Internal Conflict. These are very much three-dimensional pieces that are meticulously built and are chock-filled with details. And they're almost sensory experiences. You can hear the smells, you can see the sounds, right? I'm curious, do these take you to the same place every single time? You, Mohamad.
So the secret recipe here is, my studio where I'm sitting right now. And it's a very narrow and long space. And I have, you can go on my website and see photos of my studios. What happens is, in this very narrow space, I charge my brain and memory with a lot of sensory before I even start working. So when I'm playing Hamza Shakur, the Sufi Syrian music, when I'm hearing the trickling water in my studio, and when I'm filling the air with bakhur and incense, and I'm playing Sabah Fakhri and Fairuz, dimming the lights, it takes me about 20 minutes of looking at photos and childhood photos to really click into this creative cloud. An artist can relate to this. It's a real thing. And the opposite of it is called writer's block, artist block, when we are unable to click into this creative way of making. So if I am lucky, and I'm not lucky most of the time, if I am lucky and I click, then everything that I'm making at that time, I am not here. I am in this ethereal, romantic recreation of my memories, right? So as I am detailing and I'm moving fast from one piece to the other, and I'm having this conversation with the piece that who used to live here, there must have been a kid, and let's put his car toy out here, let's put the Finjan Ahwe out here, So because of this process, because of the back and forth between my pieces and the wall where I have 10 million objects, your brain does not pay too much attention to every single detail you're putting in the work.
Yeah.
It's keeping a bigger picture. And for me, what is really fulfilling for me is the process in itself. It's the process. Now, alhamdulillah, I am blessed to have an outcome that people can see and relate to in terms of miniature sculptures. Most people, can have different outcomes, where they need a little bit more explanation to the audience of what this art means. And so to really understand the process, I tell people, if you if technology existed to have 3D printers of our emotions, my 3D printer would be spitting out these things, right? Does not mean I have conceived and and designed every single nook and cranny in each piece. It's just it's the aftermath of this way of making this high detailed sculpture.
Do you ever make mistakes? Do you ever throw it out and say, ah, I made a mistake, that was wrong? I mean, if I could imagine like a saxophonist doing take after take after take of the solo that they want to play. That wasn't quite right. Is your art, does that question even make sense to you given the way you practice?
It makes sense, and I'll answer you that 70% of my work is mistakes.
Okay.
Because when you say mistakes, you are assuming that you were working towards a goal and you didn't reach that goal, therefore that's a mistake, right?
Yeah.
A typical painter, a classical painter, is painting a portrait, and his outcome he's painting does not match the outcome, does not match the goal, so he has made a mistake, so he chucks it out, right? Muhammad does not work towards a goal. There is no goal. There is a vague idea that gets built on the spot of what it wants to be, right? It's always judging aesthetically and visually, and that's where one eye is the artist, one eye is the architect. You know, the architect is saying the scale of this object is correct. This is too big. A window cannot be too big if a car is this small, right? So that's a mistake. Then that window needs to get smaller, right? That window needs to modify. But it's so fast that the process that I'm doing, that it's just all mistakes. It's all just very, very fast, very fast, very fast. And if something really, really, really bugs me, I'll take a hammer to it. And
Yeah.
I'll demolish it, and then I'll start all over again. But the way of creating lends itself to a lot of fluidity in the way of creating this art.
So for example, let's say this, I'm going to ask you a lot of really primary questions that may be really stupid questions. So don't be shy in saying, Mikey, that doesn't make sense. But I'm trying to understand something like Unfaced, which we're looking at right now. What's the origin story of that work?
That work was made during the toughest times in the Syrian war. And we started seeing a lot of drone footage of Syrian buildings, just the faces of it coming off. And you see inside, and you see beds and bed sheets and curtains, because life was happening to the very last minute before the bomb fell. That's when they were starting to use some air sucking technology of the bombs, and it sucks, it implodes everything. And I was going through a very hard time because everything I was seeing being destroyed, but I wanted to send a hope message. I want we are not people of despair, we're people of resilience and hope and moving forward. And most of our region are people, believers, more or less, from the three major religions, or you name it, or they're spiritual at some point. So I couldn't speak to somebody that lost all their family and their houses and all their lives a human language. I had to speak a heavenly spiritual language. So I started using verses from the Quran, verses from the Bible. And the verse that I chose to stencil here, it reads, وَلَا تَحْسَبَنَّ اللَّهَ غَافِلًا عَمَّا يَعْمَلُ الظَّالِمُونَ. Do not think that God is unaware or not witnessing what the oppressors are doing. Verily, they will meet him one day and answer for their actions, right? Now, that is a token to keep in mind, as a believer, as an artist believer, to keep in mind and remind my fellow audiences that this world is not it, that there's a day where things will be made square and fair. And most religions believe in that day of judgment. So without digging too much in the religion part, I like adding those verses of spiritual encouragement into my work because the meaning of them has a very high contrast between the meaning of the art piece. Right? You're seeing destruction, but you're seeing a piece that says, "Ud'uni astajib lakum. Inna ma'al usri yusra. Verily, after hardship, there shall come ease," and so on. And that's very important for my work because, well, I don't want to answer your. Maybe you'll ask me that later.
Go ahead.
A lot of the misconceptions about my work is that this is a sad Syrian artist that remodels the destruction of his country. We stop here, that's a problem. Yes, half of the story is destruction, but half of it is building hope through destruction. Where is the hope part? Where do we move forward? Where do we understand what's coming next? Am I just weeping over what's lost, or am I also building for the future, right? So these slogans, the graffiti that I do on the walls, can be activism, can be motivational quotes to move forward and get out of it. Undoubtedly, any artist living in our region has to understand the moment we are living in, and the moment is dark, unfortunately. But we have to have a message to uplift people, because art has that ability to really charge people and uplift them and empower them. We cannot just stop here and paint a pessimistic picture. There must be a path, there must be a light, there must be something that uplifts people.
I'm curious, whenever I speak to folks, artists of all media, how do you respond, or how do you react to criticism from people you respect? Like, have there been constructive criticism over the course of like a decade plus of your work? It could be about process, it could be about anything, but have there been really constructive criticism from people you love and respect that you say, I never thought about that? That's sort of shaped the way you do work now?
Absolutely. There's always constructive criticism from selective people in my life.
Yeah.
I'm not going to look for constructive criticism on social media.
what a hot take, Mohamad. What a hot take.
Excuse me, يعني إذا واحد cannot respect you to send you a message one-on-one and say, Mr. Hafez, I respect your work, but I think that you can improve in XYZ. And they choose to put it outside in the world. عارف كيف؟ يعني
بلا طعمه.
ما لا طعمه. من نصح الناس جهرا فقد فضحهم.
Yeah.
ما في. We think we're doing a lot of good by social media, right? Nothing. I'm not going to look into that. I select few people in my life that know who I am and what I'm working for and where I'm going with the body of work, not necessarily
any specific one,
any specific piece. أنت وين رايح؟ شو
Can you take us behind the curtain a little bit on maybe one piece of criticism over the course of a decade plus of this work where you're like, that was smart. I learned from that.
يعني my family gives me a lot of criticism at the first for the destruction pieces.
Interesting.
And my mom would say, Ahmed, stop doing the destruction, do something happy. And she was right. At the beginning, my pieces were only destruction. And that's when I thought, well, no, I have to understand where I'm at. We are in this moment, but can we plant something, a risale, a hope message, within these pieces? And that's when the calligraphy and the flowers and Shaqa'if and Nu'man started showing up in my work, and the human footprint. Another Another constructive criticism I got was translate the graffiti on your work. A lot of people are curious, and so oftentimes, and I had that mistake. I used to display them without the translation, and it made a huge difference.
Do you think you were doing that by accident, or do you think you were doing that intentionally?
No, definitely by accident. I just moved 200 miles an hour, and a lot of details fall. Yeah, I mean, we can go to town so much, but I have few people that really
You listen to
close to me that they know who I am, what I've been to, and where I'm going towards. My wife is one of them today. I share with her what I'm working on. I take videos, and she actually says, "Man, I'm not this column needs a little bit more work there." And so I enjoy it. I enjoy having another eye.
So I wanted to ask you something. Before this call, I told you, I'm calling from Beirut, and you said, I haven't been since the explosion, and I'm afraid to go. And I'm curious what other cities in the Arab world rub you the right and the wrong way. People who can't really go home, quote unquote home, whether that home is a neighborhood, whether that home is a city, whether that home is a region or a state or whatever it is.
Right.
Have interesting reactions to things. A very dear friend of mine, who I won't name, once was in Beirut with me. We were walking the streets, and he knows Beirut really well. And he said, "Beirut always bums me out." I said, "Why?" Knowing him very well, knowing that he would love Beirut, he said, "Because it reminds me of what Palestine could be." And this was years and years and years ago, but I've never forgotten it. I've never talked to him about it either. I should. And so I'm wondering what not only Beirut, but what other cities in the region, how they rub you.
Now you're digging deep. A lot of cities. Yani, subhanallah, the way history had played out. And I left the region in a quasi-critical time. I left around 2002, 2003. I remember a sovereign Iraq. I remember a sovereign Yemen. I remember a sovereign Sudan. I remember a beautiful Lebanon and a beautiful Damascus and Aleppo and an Arab region, more or less very stable without any wars. Strong countries. Regardless of the regimes, but the economy, the structure of these countries were very stable, and some people might have argued 2003 Syria was flourishing. It was the golden age. There's cell phones, internet, infitah.
Yeah, that's when infitah started.
That's when infitah started. So
yeah,
that's and then I got yanked away, right? Yeah. And I never came back. So now there's a part of me, the naive person, tried to ignore what had happened, but is really scared of going back and discovered not only the changes in context and architecture and society and archaeology, but also the changes in the human that live there, the human and personalities that have endured so much hardship. People have changed and undoubtedly changed, and I cannot, fully relate to that because I haven't lived through it. So part of me is so afraid to go back and discover how much has changed. And part of me knows that there has a lot of things have changed and a lot of things that are not going to rub me in a nice way. Going back to Beirut and seeing the aftermath, or going back to Damascus and Aleppo and seeing the aftermath of destruction. For somebody that is so immersed in these things, of course I know what happened. I look at photos, I try to get inspiration from photos. I know what happened. But the naive Mohamad inside me is like, in person, I will not live this in person without having to, لا سمح الله. لأنه يعني I'd like to freeze the romantic memory that I have as much as I'm burning to go home. It's so complicated. And you are so homesick and you want to go home and you want to see family, but on the other side, you really don't want to overwrite these beautiful memories. Now, people in the region living in these situations will think that I'm completely bananas because in times of, well, يعني the normal Joe is going to be like, well, حبيبي, we have no كهرباء, no مي, no gasoline. أنت هلا جاي عم تحكي لي على romantic memories. خلينا ناكل أول شيء. معه حق. He's absolutely right.
Yeah, but you can hold both thoughts at the same time.
Absolutely, but he's you know, I get it. I don't want to, you know, for the archaeological work that I'm doing with museums, you know, I find a lot of interest from the Western expertise that have come to our region and excavated and did this work, because our folks, you know, when I go like, but please, how can we save the stone? How can we save the churches? They'll be like, this is what you're worried about, Habibi. We don't even have electricity. You know?
Yeah.
So it's a tough moment to have these discussions.
How do you think your work lands amongst your mother's friends, so to speak? Not capital S Syria, right? How does it land in Syria? How does it land among people you actually kind of know and can imagine in your head?
Yeah. I think it you're gonna cause so much trouble between me and my mom.
No, but you know what I mean, because usually when they speak to Arab artists and they say like, how does it react to back home? And it's always this hypothetical home, but I know you're imagining actual faces.
I know.
And so tell me about those faces.
Wallahi, I can't tell you specifics because I don't know specifics.
Sure.
I try to stay, get to know as little as possible from the comments and the things that I see on social media. I can tell that they are well received. Perhaps some pieces we choose not to acknowledge at all. You know.
Yeah.
Some of the nostalgic pieces of how things were, yes, that's very much celebrated. I get asked this question a lot, and I'm curious as well of how the work is received on the ground over there. Yeah. Both in capital S Syria and in my close circles. But as you know, Mikey, when you're living in the West, you can't freely talk to somebody living there on the phone, you know, because you're going to be like, hi, how are you? Oh, everything is good. Alhamdulillah, we're good. Everything is fine. Thank you.
Everything is perfect.
Yalla, ma salama. Bye. You know, so really, you don't have time to dig into these specifics, let alone to speak about, well, what do you think about my latest piece?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Okay, before we move on to the quick Q&A, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about briefly about this beautiful, unbelievably touching film that was just recently released a few months ago through the New Yorker, called A Broken House. Can you tell us a little bit, which you can watch on YouTube? It's a 20-minute beautiful short film. Can you tell just a little bit of how this started, how this piece came about?
It came about, Apple was doing a series about home and how architects do, go about home and their works. And their research kind of found me as an architect that deals with these nostalgic memories of home and so on. But one of the executives in Apple rejected my story because they didn't think my house was fancy enough. So uh, the director, the director,
They swipe left on your home.
They
This home.
they swiped left on me. So, alhamdulillah, this is where عسى أن تكرهوا شيئاً وهو خير لكم. This is where Jenny, my good friend, the director, came across my story and called me and said, "Look, I really love your story. If I can find a way to tell it independently of this Apple series, would you be willing to do that?" And I met with him and I spoke and I felt a certain connection with him. And I said, "Yeah, let's do it." And that's how it happened. So they just, stalked me for a few months and videotaped and we shot this documentary. What was interesting about it is I think Jimmy got lucky in the sense he got me in a special moment in my life where I couldn't care less. I was doing my thing. It is what it is. خلاص. Fight. He got pure Mohamad on the, I didn't care if there's a camera or 10 over there. And that's not normal with me because I'm such a private introvert. But the energy that was stored inside of us post the war in Syria and the refugee crisis and my family leaving house and my family living with me and then me getting, into a bunch of trouble. I just couldn't care. So that the time is when we did the documentary.
It is one of those documentaries that sneaks up on you. In the beginning, I thought, oh, okay, this is just like this is a aesthetically beautiful look into somebody's behind the scenes. I thought, oh, this could be like a Vanity Fair behind the scenes video.
Yeah.
And then it's a really beautifully told story about really a broken home. It's really beautiful. So thanks for putting it out there into the world and letting us see. Let's do the rapid fire questions and then we will go into the Q&A in the audience. First question, what are you reading or watching right now?
Nothing.
Good for you.
Nothing, I'm sorry. We're going to discuss this at a later time, but I have another full-time job called Pistachio Cafe now that has stolen away all the free time that I had.
Yeah.
And I've actually, by the way, I never grew up in the United States. I don't watch TV at all. So every blue moon I might go to a movie theater, but I'm not a TV person.
Okay, good to know. Who would you love to shadow for a day, past or present?
Not an artist, not an architect, definitely. I want to shadow one of those guys that go to the middle of nowhere and dig a well in Africa or dig a water well or build a hospital. I'd really love to see how they do it. It's not easy work.
Yeah. Okay, let's keep going. You kind of answered this already. What do people most misunderstand about your work?
Yeah, that it is destruction and sadness, but they don't focus on the uplifting part of it, the human building, the hope building, the optimistic side of it. They stop at the cover.
Yeah. So for you, when somebody comes at you and says, "Oh, Mohamad, your work is so depressing, it's so sad," your retort is, if you care about this person enough to have a retort, but your retort is, "What are you talking about? This is an uplifting scene that you're looking at. There's multiplicities, there's levels to this."
Yeah, I'm not necessarily going to go to
get into it.
No, not really. Let's
yeah, let them figure it out. Yeah. Okay, last question before we get to the Q&A. Outside of your profession, whose work do you admire or are inspired by?
Outside my profession, uh, again, I'm really, inspired by folks that are doing nonprofit work full-time in their job. I have family members that um, were multimillionaires here in the United States, and they left everything after the war had started, and they dedicated themselves and their wealth to building and helping people on the ground. And that is something, to really commit 2 hours of your time a day for someone else is already a push for most of us. Yeah. Imagine committing all of your time, all of your energy to helping somebody else and without expecting any thanks. So the Syrian war had introduced me to a lot of great people that are doing a lot of good help, not only physical, but institutions and groups like yourself as well, that are trying to change the image of our region, that are trying to change this xenophobic single brushstroke that we've all been painted with. It's a lot of work, and I'm really inspired and encouraged by such efforts.
Absolutely. Okay. We're going to start. We have 3 questions so far. Reem, if you can unmute yourself and turn on your camera. Okay, I'm going to ask one of Reem's questions for her. I'll try to pick one of them that makes the most sense, as there are many that seem good. Okay, so when you're creating art, do you for a second think of George W. Bush's paintings and think that knowing very well? No, okay. That's. Do you ever think of George W. Bush's paintings? Let me ask one of the other questions because I don't think you do. Does reading ever inspire your art?
I'm sorry, does
reading ever inspire your art? Reem asks.
Yes, and a lot of poetic reading and a lot of Sufi verses and quotes and just verses of the Quran can inspire a whole piece. The richness can inspire so much.
Great. So our next question comes from Sarah, who I have to thank for helping make this event happen, as she helped introduce me to Mohamad and help facilitate this. Sarah, it's great to have you on the question. So go for it.
Thanks so much, Mikey. And Mohamad, thank you so much for sharing your work with us and for talking with us. I've really loved this conversation. And I think this question builds on what you were just saying. So just to be more specific, what kind of poetry do you think is a good companion for your art? And that could be even, specific poems or poets that you think of, or specific pieces that you think are especially linked to a poem or to a poet. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. I think, you can't talk about Damascus and not mention Nizar Qabbani and his poems about Damascus, because he also lived in the diaspora for a long time, and he wrote most of the, a lot of the amazing pieces about Damascus and his nostalgia and how he saw Damascus in his own romantic view. He also wrote poems about love that became sung in some of the Syrian songs. I have a prejudice against Arabic poetry because I love Arabic poetry, and I think it's the best companion for this kind of work because it is just such a rich language. Recently, I've been reading a lot of Sufi poetry as well, that I've been pulling out some inspirational quotes to go inside the pieces. So, the sky is the limit. But if I were to choose, if I was king for the day, I would start with Nizar Qabbani.
Okay, great. Thanks, Sarah. The last question, which we'll wrap up with, is Catherine, who just instructed me to read one of her questions. So she says, as someone who has cherished watching you create for years, I wish the audience could see the contents within your studio and your works in progress. Both are enlightening and explain so much about your process. Please discuss your involvement and work relating to the refugee crisis, the baggage exhibit, and more.
Sure. So I worked on a body of work that deals with baggage from a physical standpoint and emotional standpoint. It's called the unpacked refugee baggage. That's a good photo of it. At the time, I partnered up with Ahmed Badr, an Iraqi refugee, a writer, and an author, as well, and meeting with about maybe 20 refugee families that are resettled in New Haven from different backgrounds, because the refugee crisis was such global crisis. So we didn't want to focus on only Syrian and Iraqis, but we spoke to Afghans, Sudanese, Iranians, Russian, you name it. And we sat for a lot of hours and distilled their stories into 30 seconds, 90 seconds top sound bites that an American or Western audience will find intriguing. And of course, these were curated in such a way that what am I going to tell a Trump supporter or somebody that's against refugees in English, coming from the refugee themselves, yes, talking to them? What soundbite would they go like, wait, what? You know, so that's what you see. And then I created their stories inside suitcases. And some of the suitcases belong to their families. Some of the suitcases belong to immigrants to the United States from before. So a lot of Jewish families, German, Irish, brought me their grandparents' suitcases and said, look, this is the physical belongings of yesterday's immigrants. Help tell the story of today's immigrants. And that was critical because the body of work aims to teach how humanity mistakes can repeat themselves historically over a short period of time. You know, the age, America is 300 plus years old. Yeah. There are doorknobs in Aleppo that are older than 300 years. So the fact that we forget our history as a nation here and how these xenophobic acts repeat themselves. Today it's against Middle Eastern and Muslim refugees. Yesterday it was against Jewish. Before it was against Irish. Before it was against Catholic, and so on. So you name it.
Yeah.
And this is a traveling exhibit that is a standalone, and it goes from one institution to the other. And I try to focus on educational institutes like universities and academies.
Amazing. Mohamad, we are all out of time. I feel like I could talk to you for another hour or two. This was really, really illuminating. Thanks for letting me ask you some slightly invasive questions, but I feel like I was talking to a friend, so thanks for letting me do that.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
Everyone, you can find Mohamad online. Just search his name. You'll find him on all social media stuff, as well as his website. I highly encourage that you go check out that New Yorker documentary on YouTube. It's really beautiful, very powerful. I left the link to our feedback form. It's a single question. Was this good? Let us know. And if you are able to and inspired to support Afikada's work, please do so by going to afikada.com/support. And we will see you at one of the upcoming events. We got one tomorrow and the one the next day. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much. Enjoy your day or your night wherever you are.